game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One2One.
Hello, welcome to One2One. Previously on the show, Moses Babatope, founder and CEO of Nile Media Entertainment, spoke extensively about the trajectory and challenges of Nigeria's rapidly developing film industry. Today is the second installment of that interview. So let's talk about the wedding party.
Yeah.
I know you love to talk about that.
I love to.
For me, that really is about picking a winner.
Yeah.
Isn't it? You landed on your feet over that one. Obviously, board collaboration and audacious move, no doubt. But I remember watching and listening to Mel Gibson once, and he was talking about his landmark project, The Passion of the Christ. Another very bold, audacious move. To many, ill-advised in some ways. And I remember him saying he had this meeting with distributors and, one by one, they all left the room. There was one guy left in the room who said, well, we'll do it. What have you done before? Not much. And the rest is history.
Correct.
The rest. So my question is, what instinctively tells you that's a winner? How do you pick a winner?
I've been asked this question a number of times. I think that it's come with years and years of also getting it wrong. Get years and years of like, yeah, that's not worked. And I feel like there is a strength in seeing the pattern of what's not worked, that what works actually stands out, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
And you've trained your intuition, your guts. You just there's something within you that just says, you know what? This, because of this is why this is going to work. In a lot of cases, the ensemble is very important. In a lot of cases, I find that a lot of films that work, there are a set of characters in the film that embody so much, about the story. The performance is so strong. So let me tell you in recent times. So in Wedding Party was Shola Sobowale that had such a very, very career-defining, performance. Indeed. The same thing she did with King of Boys.
Indeed.
If you think about Shantytown, for example, Chidi Mokeme, and you can go to those films. Funke Akindele's A Tribe Called Judah. There was talking points about rich characters that you don't forget. There's a particular series now streaming on Netflix called To Kill a Monkey, and the characters, and what they embody, and the ability of the actor to bring that character to life and make that character feel very real.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like that is a big part of knowing that a film is going to make it. Because people are going to talk about those characters. People can forgive the story, and those characters are a reason for them to go see.
Yes.
Because that character or those characters, they know they've seen somewhere. Yes. They can relate with, and that's always a big thing, for me. Of course, the technical quality is also a thing, where the cinematography carries, weight and it looks really good, looks really rich. And then, that met with a decent marketing strategy and marketing budget. The combination of that is often lethal when it comes to the box office, and typically those are the things I look out for. There's a lot of times where the story and performance and the film is strong, but there are no resources to carry it. Then you also make a call, like, we need to support this, we need to get behind this.
Yes.
People also ask, is there a formula to making hit films? And I think there is. I honestly think that there is a formula. If you look at just the Nigerian box office now, there are a number of people that you call, you call like they are anchor filmmaker, producers, actors. They kind of take those tags. You know, they will act in the film. They will, of course, perform producing roles in the film, and you can tag them as filmmakers, and they get behind their work. You know, they use their social media following. You know, and they've built a track record. So people like Funkekindele comes in that mode. Kule Afolayo, they'll come in that mode. Tony Abraham comes in that mode. Odulade Adekola, even credit the Yoruba industry. There's about 7, 8 of them. Messi Aigbe, Muiwa Ademola recently. Lateef Adedimeji, Femi Adebayo. You know, even there's he's coming with a film now. I've forgotten his name. There are a number of them that have their strong following and their strong base. You know, and you know. Come to cinema. Monio Boli came to cinema last year. She was one of the pioneers in time pass of meet and greets. You know, RMD. A number of them, you know, have that, and they're able to, you know, do a decent film, good stars, and they have their following that they can persuade to come. You can almost tell that the film will work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, Shanty
Town.
As far as I'm concerned, that's Chidi Mokeme being Chidi Mokeme.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Amazing stuff.
I feel we're at a good point in the conversation, a mature point in this conversation, to ask you a pointed question.
Okay.
Actually, as a film exhibitor, distributor, and even on occasion a producer.
Correct.
You've had a front row seat, pun intended, in observing the evolution of locally produced content in this country over the years. I mean, Nollywood has already become the second largest film industry in the world. Some may dispute that, but those are the records that we have, producing well over 2,500 films annually, gaining global recognition and collaborations with international partners like Netflix, and even on occasion, mainstream Hollywood, and helping to propel it onto a global stage. I would like to know what you would say, or if you have been impressed so far by the creative and technical progression of this locally created content, and also, you know, what development needs you feel still exist in the production of our content.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's a very short answer to let you know that immensely proud of, you know, our accomplishments in this industry. Immensely proud against the backdrop of the severe challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis in this economy. But in any given set, any given production, you know, is employing minimum, any proper film is employing minimum 60, 70 people, right? That being accommodated, being fed, you know, new skills are, you know, gotten. And they will face all sorts depending on the scale of the production. And yet, the films and the quality of the films are getting better. I mean, if you just look at the trajectory I mentioned to you, where, you know, box office split was less than, you know, 7% 10 years ago, and it's 48, 49% now. You know, we can be a sentimental people, but we also are people that like good stuff, quality stuff.
Yes.
As we have seen those results in the box office, we've seen great results on streaming as well. We've seen Nigerian films hit the top 10 in various countries.
Absolutely.
On Netflix, on Prime, you know. So there's so many ways to look at this, and for me, it's just immense and incredible, you know, how, you know, those films are also making a social impact. We're seeing even the quality of people coming into the industry. People are more what I call it, people are more open to their children going to study film or making a crossover from, you know, more technical and more traditional, you know, subjects and training to, coming into film and coming to the creative industry. So for me, it's grown in leaps and bounds. And if once you look at, we like to have this global validation, even, selection in festivals, in Oscar qualifying festivals, in being able to have an Oscar committee to represent our films. You could see across every way you want to evaluate it, you've seen there's no way one can ignore, the progress that has been made. And like I said, in a segment that is deeply independent, that has gotten no kind of institutional support, right? And has been able to record this progress. So for me, it's fantastic, it's phenomenal, and it can only get better. You asked about the creative, development side of it. I think that that we, as we're making this growth, I think that, and I believe that a number of us are thinking about it as well. And why there's always a lot of frustration is, it takes some time for, palpable change to occur. But the point I was kind of going to is, with our story crafting, there seems to be some kind of, issues there where, in terms of developing the story and the screenplay, we're not taking enough time to develop those things. And as a result, the critics will say the story sometimes is lacking. The people, some other people will say that's what is, kind of preventing us from globally dominating. I have my views on all of that, because I think it's important to be authentic and true to ourselves and who we are. And if we do that in the best possible way, I think that's what makes us global.
Yes.
Right? And, look at Afrobeats. A guy like Ashake, who hardly sings in English, yet he's dominating global charts because he's authentically that. And the technical production is such that, people, abroad, with different palettes, really, really enjoy that. And I feel like that's what Nollywood needs to be, like really, really appreciates its own and does its best to be in it, to craft and create in its truest form, right? Without setting out to look for like global approval, looking for some kind of international validation. Do it to the best of, like, this is watchable, this is beautiful, this is great to see, right? And I believe in doing that, that's how we'll find our style, we'll find our medium that would then be, sought after. We have work to do, because we're in an era where, as well, people are not valuing training as much. You have easy access to cameras. You watch a YouTube tutorial or two, AI does a number of things for you, and you feel like you've become an expert. But it requires deep tooling. It requires deep, training. It requires real nurturing, and that's my fear, that we want to bypass all of those things and still want to be a great industry. So I think the more we can, in a coordinated manner, continue to talk about the importance of our actors and actresses retraining and on learning some sharp practices, and really, really being passionate about their craft and being the best at what they are, as much as they want to do the show, and our directors also not just coming from an egotistic standpoint. What is that? Just, controlling people, but really going to understand what it means to direct in 2025 with all the tools you have, and producing and all the various elements, and people like us and other people really harping on that. I think that, we will take this industry to the next level if we can get that part of things right.
Yeah. So Moses, I'm going to encourage you to call a spade in this conversation. So talking about the richness and depth of our cultural expression through film, the question of authenticity.
Yeah.
So would you say, if you were to take that one step further, that perhaps directors and producers who have leaned more on the richness of our culture and expressed themselves in film in our local languages, are perhaps closer to attaining that mark of authenticity, which hopefully will then globalize the industry.
Absolutely, 200%. I feel they are the closest. 200%. Because, for me, I asked one of my friends, Marie Longai, like, what makes a film global? And as she puts it well, like, it is, situating a story or finding, a particular event or events that has happened in a particular, environment, and you cannot find that story anywhere else. You cannot find the way that is done anywhere else. Once you do that in a very authentic way, it tends to, really spark global interest. Yes. I remember Ted Sarandos saying it also, that the more local it is, they find, the more global that it tends to have. I think what has been missing, and big shout out to all our filmmakers that have really gone, the indigenous route. I think what we need to do more is in terms of the technical execution of a lot of that. And what do I mean by technical execution? Speaking to a lot of the platforms, there are concerns about our films being too long. Can we get to the point quicker? And the worlds that we create, in these films, can we, if we're going to use a lot of skill, can we take time with, the sets that we're building? Can we take time in post-production to make sure the VFX is as believable? Can we take time that even the nuances that we have in our language and everything is well captioned, is well, subtitled to get people's interest? Typically with digital platforms like Netflix and Prime, that first 2 minutes is so important in grabbing the interest of an audience. How are we doing to spark that interest? And those are the things that we need to do and incorporate in those, in those indigenous stories. Why are these indigenous stories? Why do they have the most chance? The language is, nobody has heard them before. The way a Yoruba person will prostrate, I'm not sure I've seen any other country in the world that will prostrate. There are things we do and say, in, a family gathering and family setting that is unique to us. Or what have the Koreans, specialized in with their dramas, or the Turks in their very long form series. They've found a particular medium and stayed true to it. Absolutely. And that's, and what of Bollywood, for example, and Bollywood started off very much as a lot of dance and singing dramas, and have now morphed into, a lot more expressions that they're doing a lot of high-end stuff now.
Absolutely.
So we need to find that one or two, mediums of expression in film. And I believe that the indigenous language path is the fastest one.
Absolutely. The Indian film, Bollywood has certainly moved on from the days of
Absolutely.
Sholay and your Dan Ki Barat,
yes,
to the wonderful things that they're doing now. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to talk a bit more about streaming platforms. Of course, it's been said very frequently that we have had an over-dependence on global streamers for monetization. There are those, and this is relevant to your particular end of the industry, there are those who would say that part of the answer, part of the solution is expanding cinema infrastructure across the country. And we've spoken a little bit about that already. but I'd like to ask what, in your assessment, is the economic viability of that, and how sustainable is it, given the obvious costs to people like you, and also the general economic situation. People have to pay for these tickets.
Yes. So look, I've always been of the opinion that streaming is a very essential part of the ecosystem, of particularly of when it comes to the life cycle of films and how you monetize them, and so we've always viewed it from it being a complementary platform to monetize content.
So what streaming complements
Cinema. I mean, if you look at it historically, films that do well in box office tend to do well on streaming.
Sure.
It's hard to say vice versa because that often doesn't happen. If it's on streaming, it would never come to cinema except maybe if there was an award run or something. Even that would be tough. But we need those digital platforms as well to monetize. It's just part of the life cycle. But we mentioned when the question was asked, we need to find more, platforms to monetize. Cinema, more digital platforms, more airlines taking our films, more TV stations licensing our films, more more international stations playing our films, more international cinemas playing our films. We just the idea is to find more of these, showing our films. But if we just kind of sit still and just expect the streamers to do their thing, we have no bargaining power. Yes. We have no leverage.
Of course.
So in a way, cinema gives you leverage.
It does. It does.
That's the point that gets people getting.
I mean, it's especially as we now know that global streamers like Netflix, Amazon Prime have decided to pack their bags. They're no longer commissioning original content.
Yes.
Of course, the next logical thing to think is, well, how about the viability of local?
Absolutely.
Of course, YouTube is here to stay.
Yes.
But how about local streamers?
Yes.
And I say that knowing in the back of my mind that there is a looming context here. Yeah. A local streamer like Iroko TV.
Yes.
Recently founder has told us that they haven't spent about $100 million over 10 years. They've had to scale down their operations to put it mildly. How viable is that as an option to support this? Is there room for local streamers to step in?
I think there's room for local streamers to step in, and big shout out to my very good friend, dear friend Jason Njoku, who again I think was just they were just at the forefront of this a great innovation and kind of like was ahead of its time. A lot of the things that they were pioneering were just ahead of its time at the time, and any business can fall victim of that. We've seen that happen. I don't think that kind of forecloses being able to compete in this era. I think that there are fundamental things that need to be addressed for a local player to be successful in this market. But local players are very important to have. Sure. Those local players also must understand, what that business entails for this market, not what is or they consider best practice globally. What are the watching patterns? Who are those watching? How much are they willing to pay? How does data influence their judgments? These are, sitting with the telcos, depending on how important, how serious you are, these are things that need to be well researched and learned on. Why, sir, I kind of always dismiss anyone telling me streaming will be hard is if cinemas are here and standing and a number of them profitable, logically for me, digital should work.
Yes.
If people would leave their homes and spend an average per person of 10 to 12,000 or 15,000 to leave their homes, why wouldn't same people or people just under them in terms of social class or maybe a bit more under them spend 1,000 naira at the comfort of their homes?
Okay. So, it's a known fact, particularly in recent times, and we've talked about it in this conversation, Nigerian movie titles trending, the #1 film on Netflix, and so on and so forth. Films like The Wedding Party, we've spoken about, rely around some Kuti, for example. Obviously a very commendable trend. Would you say that this metric is in any way influenced by, perhaps partly by Nigerians and Africans in the diaspora, or does our content actually have cross-cultural and global appeal, in your opinion?
I think it's a mixture of both. I would say that our diaspora have a strong voice. I think we're witnessing an era of diaspora where we've come into our own. Second and third generation Nigerians, lot more educated, very exposed, have disposable income, have become a lot more patriotic. The music, the fashion, a lot of those things, are driving, curiosity in Nigerian culture, globally. I think that, I always reference it, I feel like popular Black culture is becoming Nigeria. I feel like the music is a real testament to that, the fashion, the art, that we see, and in number of times film is coming there. So I think diaspora has pushed a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the charting. But I think that in terms of looking for the next frontier of storytelling, there's a curiosity about our films. And let's not forget, in terms of, making the headlines for the right and wrong reasons, whether it is, the hush puppy case of fraud or, sports achievements, some of our great basketballers in the NBA, or in football that are of Nigerian origin, the headlines that we make, that puts us there. And therefore, where you hear of Nigerian, but let's not forget our food, the jollof wars,
of course,
and all of that. There are things that are happening that you cannot ignore. A headline from Nigeria. You cannot ignore, oh, this is a Nigerian film, I should see. It was not like that 5-6 years ago. It was definitely not like that 10 years ago. And with social media as well, we're seeing a lot more cultural expression that has been appreciated. Let's not forget a place like Brazil that has a big concentration of Black people. Where is their reference for Black excellence, if not, through Nigerian creativity, for example? So for me, I think it's a combination of the diaspora and just, Nigerian excellence, coming out and getting the attention of the international community. So what I'm saying to, the new generation of filmmakers and storytellers is, it's not enough to say, I don't have funding. What have you done with the resources that is available to you?
Camera in your pocket.
Absolutely. What have you done, with that network you have? What have you done with the information that you've gotten by attending, a seminar or a podcast that you're listening to? What have you done with that YouTube tutorial? What have you done in terms of looking to work for free to get experience? You build all of these things together, it gives you a fighting chance.